It's another episode of the Growing Compass podcast. I am not recording from my home setup. I am recording far away. I'm in Winnipeg, Manitoba, visiting family, visiting my folks, visiting my dad and my brother, Harry Adamson, and my mom. So I'm doing it from Winnipeg, but I'm still get to travel virtually, and in this case, interview the most worshipful Grandmaster of Kentucky, Brother James Gibson. Thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Now, I do want to keep going what we were talking about just a second ago offline. I have been lucky enough to interview the Masonic Homes of Kentucky, the first Masonic homes in the States. And we were talking about the benefits that ritual work and Masonic work can provide, especially though it can happen at any age, especially for older brethren who may be at risk for Alzheimer's or dementia. So you talk a little bit about that and the programs that you guys have been developing in Kentucky to kind of aid those brothers.
All right. Thank you. First off, it's great to be here, and thank you for asking me to be on. We were talking about the memory care program that the Masonic Homes of Kentucky has for their dementia and Alzheimer's patients or residents. And what I'm really proud of what they've done over the last several years, that they've developed a couple of programs. One is called Remember Me, and the other one is called Remember When, where what we've done through our fundraising efforts, we've been able to provide them the resources of computers and monitors to where they can take Alzheimer's and dementia patients and they could see images that they grew up with. We've worked with the family members where we're able to get pictures of the old towns they used to live in or music that they're comfortable listening to. And one story that sticks out particularly, this happened several years ago. They had a lady, which we don't divulge any names for the purpose of confidentiality. They had a lady in the program, and she would basically sit there. And what we didn't know at that time is she was a musician. And she would hear specific music, and she would be, for the most part, be totally immobile. She would just sit there, and then her hand would start moving to the music. And when we finally were able to whittle it down to music she was familiar with, she would recognize that. Another case, we had a lady that, again, she hardly spoke, and they were showing her pictures of the town she grew up in. And one picture in particular came up, and she saw a store that she used to frequent when she was a child. And for the first time in I don't know how long, she pointed at the screen, and her words were, I bought a dress there. And so it triggers those memories. And so it's a part of that process of keeping those memories alive in them. And so I'm really proud of the program that they're doing with that, because if you can keep those memories alive, keep those rejuvenated, that slows down the process of plaque building up in the brain where that creates Alzheimer's and dementia.
And yeah, you've talked about that a little also offline. So there's there's like the chronic care. There's the care of somebody who has already been diagnosed or experiencing Alzheimer's symptoms. But we also talked offline a little bit, because this is something I know almost nothing about, but the benefits for a brother or brethren when keeping them active in a lodge as they get older, keeping them doing memory work and
Yes.
ritual work. Can you talk a bit about just the benefits you've seen to regular memory work for, say, an older brother, or in terms of perhaps as a fighting against Alzheimer's or the effects of Alzheimer's?
Right. Well, to give you a little background on myself, I was a firefighter and emergency medical technician for 20 years here in Somerset, Kentucky. And we did a lot of transfers to basic care facilities for Alzheimer's and dementia patients. And one of the things that we always focus on is repetitiveness, how certain repetitive actions and deeds of that person would keep that fresh on their mind. And we would tell Alzheimer's families, get them into a routine, because that routine becomes familiar. It's almost like a muscle memory, but it's the muscle of the brain. And so that applies in the lodges to where you keep these active ritualists or brothers at, practicing those rituals, reciting those rituals, or tutoring young ritualists. And through that repetitiveness, that keeps that brain active. And we're really fortunate here in Kentucky. I'm sure, as I'm sure most jurisdictions are, to have quite a few ritualists available. And most of our greatest ritualists are some of the older brothers that attend our lodges. And so we constantly encourage them to keep doing ritual and to, like I said, to train younger ritualists. And through that repetitiveness, through that action, that keeps them. I can't give you a clinical diagnosis as to whether or not it slows down the progress of Alzheimer's, but it keeps them active and it's not as noticeable.
Yeah, and I think, I have a tendency to get frustrated with, or brothers will ask why I tend to get frustrated with things like low attendance or low numbers in Freemasonry, or the dropping memberships. And I think what you just talked about, it's kind of why, because it's not just a happy fun time. When it's done right and when it's done well, it's people's lives. It's making people's lives better. It's making, it's fighting the effects of Alzheimer's. It's giving socialization to someone who wouldn't otherwise have it. It really can be, when it's done well and correctly, and when it actually is growing, it's not just an enjoyable experience, it's saving people's lives.
Right.
And I think the Masonic Homes of Kentucky and the work that you're talking about and the work that a Masonic Lodge does, it really can save people's lives if it's done right.
Right. And like you said, keeping them active, keeping them involved, that's crucial to them. That's their, a lot of our older Masons, that's all they've got, is to be able to attend lodge and participate. And, I'm sure every jurisdiction took a major hit with that during COVID, to where lodges were shut down, people were unable to attend, or our older Masons were apprehensive about attending. And so what we did, or what the virus did, is kept them from participating, and it slowed that, it slowed that interactivity down to where they started suffering for it. And once we were able to get back into our lodges and get them back active, you can see a marked change in their personalities and their character and their behavior.
Yeah, I concur 100%. I saw that myself with some of our older members. One of the turning to COVID, one thing I saw with COVID that concerns me, and it still concerns me, and it wasn't anybody's fault. I think it's understandable. I don't know how else you could have done it, but during COVID, our Grand Lodge in Ontario, and I'm assuming Kentucky, I'm assuming most jurisdictions, basically put out a blanket dispensation allowing the worshipful master, treasurer, and secretary to handle the business affairs of the lodge, to pay the bill, without needing to go through motions and votes. We still had, and I think Grand Lodge, to their credit, really pushed virtual meetings and refreshment hours and virtual events, which were great. But actual business proper was handled by those individuals. And what I've seen coming back is a lot of members seem to have kind of lost interest in the quote unquote boring aspects of the craft, the paying of the bills, the minutes, because it was so centralized amongst those three. I've even had Masons tell me that in their opinion, we should do away with business meetings altogether. We should just allow the master, secretary, and treasurer to handle the business affairs. You have one meeting a year where you invest in new officers, and the rest of it is degrees and social events. I guess my question is, as a Grand Master, did you see that concentration of work going to kind of masters, secretaries, treasurers, and how do you make sure that the membership stays interested and involved in the more, again, quote unquote, boring aspects of the craft that are nonetheless important?
Well, luckily, our Constitution enables us to do it, because our Constitution says that all business has to be performed on a specific degree in open lodge. And as you stated, during COVID, our Grand Master at that time passed a blanket dispensation that the primary officers of the lodge would handle the usual and customary bills. So, and they would do that electronically. We didn't encourage them to go to a lodge and meet as a group because of COVID. We had them communicating electronically with each other. And you're right, this has become an age-old problem to where we've got young Masons or Masons in general coming to lodge seeking something other than the arduous task of sitting there going through the bills item by item, number by number, and that being the only item of the lodge, and then going home. They're looking for something else. What we try to do is we tell them that the paying of the bills are a necessity. The management of their business is a necessity. And our members have a right to vote as to how their money is being spent. The Grand Lodge doesn't govern the specific funds of the lodges. So we tell them, that's part of your process. That's part of your duties as a member of that lodge to see that you're all good stewards of the money that flows to that lodge. You all make decisions as to how that's conducted, how the business is conducted. But only during that emergency did we make that transition to where just the primary officers would do it.
And to what extent do you think that reflects a failure on the part of older or more experienced Masons? Like, I wouldn't consider myself old, but I've been in the craft for 15, 16 years. To fail to communicate the importance of those things. I think, just in my opinion, a lot of emphasis in terms of things like bringing in new members has been on, and you see like some of the advertisements. I saw an advertisement, I think it was out of the Grand Lodge of Australia, I think, talking about Freemasonry is fun. Freemasonry is a chance to get some drinks with your pals. Freemasonry is meet new people, as opposed to making sure you communicate. Freemasonry is, there's also a work aspect to it. There's also a sacrificial aspect to it in terms of your time and your efforts. And that stuff is important too. I mean, even something as small as, this will sound funny, but we ran out of toilet paper once and no one knew where to get it because the guy who normally gets it wasn't there. It's one of those things where the little things sometimes get lost in kind of in the search for the deeper truth, right? Sometimes you need to know where the toilet paper is.
Well, and it's not just that; it also flows into our rituals. It flows into how we conduct our degrees. What happens is you have your mainstays who make things work, and then as they get older, they've stopped explaining to the young people coming into the lodge, this is what we do, this is how we do it, and most importantly, this is why we do it. And so when they get new members into the lodge, they almost feel separate because they've got these busy bees in this corner doing all these things. And so they wound up developing this almost complacency of, well, these guys are doing it, so I don't have to worry about how it's done or why it's done. They're just doing it. Well, then when all of a sudden something stops that process, the ones who need to step up and understand how it's done and why it's done, they don't have the answers. And so it is a communication process. And one of the things that I've harped on this year is about, especially to our more veteran members, is we're not asking anybody to pass the torch. We're simply asking you to share it. And we're not asking you to step aside to make room for someone else. We're asking you to create a legacy by teaching them how to take on the roles that you take on when they're ready to do it.
I think that's absolutely the correct approach, and something more lodges need to communicate, right?
Yeah.
And more Grand Lodges and more jurisdictions need to communicate. It's about it's you got to share it, because if no group can do everything for the whole time, eventually they're going to burn out. And if the next group doesn't know how to take over properly, where the toilet paper is, how to do the ritual,
Right.
what the ritual is, it's not going. That's when you hit that cliff, hit that wall.
Right. And another part of that aspect is, and something that needs to be emphasized to every lodge, is to make our meetings meaningful. You can handle the bills. You can specify a specific amount of time for handling the usual and customary business of your lodge, but make the rest of your meeting meaningful.
That's a really good question, a really good statement. How would you define meaningful?
Meaningful is something that's going to enrich the brothers that are there. I'll give you a prime example. I visited a lodge, and they had a young master mason. He had just recently been raised. He was excited to be there. And this was his first meeting back to the lodge as master mason. And they opened their lodge, and during the course of the lodge meeting, I literally timed it. They spent 45 minutes discussing whether or not they should have onions with their bean supper. First off, what kind of beans were they going to have? Was it going to be pinto beans, white beans, northern beans? Now, what kind of onions? Is it going to be Vidalia onions, green onions, yellow onions? And the conversation just kept going down these rabbit holes. And the young master mason's just sitting there. He's happy to be there, And at the end of their discussion, after they timed it, I stood up and I said, "Can I make a comment?" And they said, "Sure." And I asked the young master mason, I said, "We're nearing the end of your meeting tonight. What was your takeaway for this meeting?" And his takeaway was that Bobby didn't like yellow onions. How is that enriching our brothers? Get into the history of some of our lectures, get into the important aspects of how these lessons that were taught in Freemasonry create behavioral changes in our conduct. My philosophy this year, or my slogan this year, has been about character, conduct, and commitment. Well, all of those are behavioral changes. And the way it changes our behaviors is based on what we're taught in our lodges. And if you're not being taught anything, your behavior is not going to change. So how do you expect someone to be a better Mason?
And where does that start in terms of developing meaning? Because if you are having you have an applicant come forward,
mm-hmm.
One thing that it's always important is you meet with the applicant, you meet with the person that we meet with the candidate. You want to get to know him. He may have things that are what he may find meaningful in the craft could be very different than somebody else. He may be a history student and he's joining to be part of a historical organization,
right?
Wants to see the records. Somebody else could be joining out of a family connection. You could have new Canadian, new American, an immigrant, but somebody who's just moved into the location looking for social connections. Like, how important is it during that initial process and even not even for initial process, I suppose, even for maybe we call them rusty Masons, a Mason who hasn't been out for a while, talking to them about what is it you're hoping to get from this and what would be meaningful to you.
Right. Well, what we've done, and this has become an age-old problem, is we separated the batch. We take, and we do it by habit. We separate a lodge room. You can walk into any given lodge room, regardless of the jurisdiction. And these are the old guys, these are the young guys. But what we stop to realize is that the young guys are hungry. The young guys want to learn. The old guys, they don't realize that they're still open to learning. And so what we've got to do is develop that hunger in them as much as we have in the young guys. And to basically encourage it and cultivate it and nurture that hunger in both of them. And the way to do that is to get them talking to each other. A prime example, like you said, to back up during the normal and customary businesses, ask your lodge leaders to develop apprentices. Pick someone, one of these new guys, and make them your apprentice. Teach them everything you know. And what that's going to do is make them hungry to go back and relive what their experiences are, so they can share it with the young Masons coming in, and then you've got this blend or a more cohesive group. instead of division in the lodges. And it's not a contentious division. It's just a division of ideas and personalities. And we've also got older Masons, and I've experienced this in lodges where I've had older Masons. I haven't heard that lecture in forever, or I forgot how important that lesson was. Thank you for coming back to the lodge and teaching that. And that rejuvenates them. It rejuvenates their interest and their drive and their willingness to become part of this whole movement of making your meetings meaningful.
And, in terms of there's making the meetings meaningful. That's hard to say, easy for me to say. But then there's also making your events, making your special occasions, making your refreshments meaningful. And then there's what you have coming up in about a month, making your Grand Lodge a meaningful experience. So tell me, because I know it's happening in Bowling Green. I'm hoping I get to visit because I love traveling and seeing different communications. But tell me about kind of what the Grand Lodge of Kentucky has planned for Bowling Green in about 5 weeks. October. I'll put the date down there. I forget what it is now.
To get to that point, I've got to go to the beginning. In 4 years ago, when I was elected as Grand Junior Warden, we had been discussing about branching out from Louisville. Historically, the Grand Lodge session has been held in Louisville for well over 100 years. And we looked at it from several different aspects. Is this going to be a way of rejuvenating interest in attending our Grand Lodge session? Is this going to be financially more beneficial for our craft as they're traveling and so forth, because of hotel rates, because of amenities, because of the space and so forth? And nothing against Louisville. Historically, we love Louisville, Kentucky, and we just looked at it as a strong business decision. To our craft have their concerns about hotel rates in larger metropolitan areas, especially during our Grand Lodge session. So we looked at where can we find some place that would accommodate that at a lesser rate, and we found Bowling Green. It's a fantastic area, and the historical significance of coming out of Jeffersonville over 100 years has piqued their interest. As a matter of fact, my convention chairman called me this week and said we've had a higher amount of reservations than we've had in years. We've had a higher amount of out-of-state visitors coming to Kentucky for that session than we've had in years, and they want to be part of something historical. And I think just the overall environment that we're going to be creating, one primary example, and it's a small example at that, is traditionally we've only had 1 or 2 vendors at our Grand Lodge session because we simply couldn't accommodate the space. This year I sent out well over 20 some odd invitations to a variety of vendors, and we've got quite a few coming to provide a good experience there. My wife and I, we've been known for the last 4 years about breaking the mold, the traditional mode of this is how we do it because that's the way we've always done it, And so we've amped up the energy, we've amped up the interest in the environment, and we're just looking forward to having a wonderful time.
I think that's one. First of all, and I don't speak for my Grand Lodge or any Grand Lodge. I think it's wonderful to move your Grand Lodge around. In Ontario, we just did that for the first. Well, I don't know when the switch happened. I joined Freemasonry in 2007, and since joining, our Grand Lodge communication was always held right downtown Toronto at the Royal York, which is right across from the train station. Then, when COVID hit, it went virtual, and I thought the Grandmaster did a really, really good job organizing a virtual Grand Lodge. But then this year, for the first time forever, since I don't know when, it was moved to a different location, still within the Greater Toronto area, but a different location more north. And I thought it was great. I thought it's wonderful to see it moving around because you get the chance to kind of bring in different Masons. And especially, I don't know how big Kentucky is, but Ontario is bigger than Texas. And, for a brother to get from, say, Kenora, Ontario to Toronto is no, it's not easy. So moving it around, getting it to some locations, I think is wonderful in any jurisdiction to see that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the people of Bowling Green, at least from an economic standpoint, are going to be quite happy because again, it's helping the local economy. They're going to be at the restaurants, at the hotels, taking, it's a chance for Bowling Green as well as a city to show itself off to
Absolutely.
visitors.
And like I said, traditionally because we've moved it geographically, we're having more members that ordinarily would not make the drive to Louisville wanting to attend Bowling Green. And Western Kentucky Masons are coming in droves. Even Eastern Kentucky Masons are there. We've got the curiosity seekers that said, well, this is a brand new experience. I want to know what it's like. And if it's something that turns out to be a great experience, then let's continue to do that. Let's continue to move across the state. Of course, we're very limited in Kentucky as far as venues that can accommodate such a large size. And but we were fortunate to get Bowling Green, and we're really excited to be there. So.
And I've talked a little bit about this with people from my Grand Lodge, but is there any partnership with, or not, maybe not partnership, but yeah, any partnership, any working with the government in Bowling Green in terms of like connecting with the local tourism office or local sites to see? I think in Windsor, Ontario, where I'm from, we did a cornerstone ceremony at the new city hall. And obviously, because it was a new city hall, that did give us the advantage of, we kind of had to partner with the mayor, with city council, but it was a really great chance to show to the city, like what Masons could do to bring people in, because we had visitors from Detroit, Manitoba, all over the place. It's a really great way to kind of show off what the fraternity can mean to a city, again, in an economic tourism standpoint.
Right. Well, what we've done, and it was just sheerly coincidental that it fell within the same time frame. Just last week, Bowling Green Lodge celebrated their 200th anniversary. And they had some city and county leaders there, the city commissioners, the city mayor, and so forth. And they've all been invited to our grand session also, and they'll be presenting a proclamation to the Grand Lodge of Kentucky. And, it's a great event. We're really excited to hype it up. And of course, we've got the Corvette Museum, as well as some great tourist areas for them to visit, Beach Bend Park. And so everybody seems to be excited about coming.
Was there any pushback when you first proposed? You said 4 years ago when you became Grand Junior Warden. When you first proposed moving it out of Louisville, was there any pushback?
Not so much pushback as there was concern and curiosity. We've never, the old adage, we're Masons, so we're kind of joined at the hip to this old status of we've never done it that way before. That, and I'm one of those guys that I take that on as a challenge. And when they say, well, why are we doing that? We've never been out of Jefferson County, Kentucky before. So let's try it and see how it works. And so initially there were some concerns, and there's always the general concern that, now I'm going to have to drive a little bit further than I would have had I gone to Louisville, or, it's going to add an extra 30 minutes, 45 minutes to my, traveling. And that all kind of hit in the first year, but I spent that whole year going to district meetings and talking about the logistics of it, promoting the aspects of, what the experience may be like. And now 3 years later, you're not hearing anything negative. Everybody's excited about coming to Bowling Green.
And is that, to what extent is that just putting in the work and the road hours of traveling? Because I think you're 100% correct, right? When it comes to Freemasonry, there can be a habit of the way to do things, the way that we've always done things, and trying to convince people otherwise can be an interesting experience in some cases.
Oh, well, as a matter of fact, just to give you a heads up, one of the recommendations I'm making this year, we have this is a peripheral thing. We have 4 approved publications in which we use for our ritual work. Okay. And I made a recommendation that why don't we form an ad hoc committee to combine the best elements out of all four publications into one single ritual, and then a policies and procedures book about best practices for your lodge. Now, years ago, if you approached our grand community about a unified ritual, it's like, no, we're not doing that. Well, then the reason that they would develop that pushback is they thought that we're asking them to change the way in which they teach our rituals. And so the best analogy I gave them was, I asked them, I said, how many of you drive on this interstate? And everybody raised their hand, and I said, well, how many drive the same car as the person sitting next to you? And nobody responded. I said, my point being is the interstate is the ritual. The car you're driving is how you deliver the ritual. But you got to get on that ritual to get to your destination.
I've never heard that, but I like that analogy a lot. I think that's a very good analogy. The and I think what I love about what you're talking about is, like if Freemasonry, Freemasonry does have to find some ways to change. I just don't see how it survives well if it doesn't. And not so much, obviously, it needs to, there's a tradition, there's the core of it, but then there's just being open to different things. Or if you're not open to different things, being able to explain why. And so we can, an example I just had recently, my last episode was about Masonic NFTs, non-fungible tokens, which is a bunch of Masons created something called Ether Lodge. They're working on it, right? And I don't know whether it's a good idea or not so good idea. I personally like it. I think Freemasonry needs a imprint in the virtual world as well as in the physical world. I think we need to be everywhere. But I posted this episode, and one person responded to me, and all they said was no. That was their response. No details.
Just flat no. Just sorry.
And I was like, I got back and I was like, I need a little bit more to work with here. Like, what are your specific concerns? And I can either answer them as to why I disagree, or maybe your specific concerns will change my mind. But I think so many times in Freemasonry, when a new idea is presented, the answer is just no. And you're like, well, that doesn't really help get you anywhere. You need to work on why it's no, and how can we have this discussion in a way that will get somewhere we both want to go.
Right. Well, here's an example I used at our district meetings. Of course, we have a lot of hunters here in Kentucky. And so I asked them, I said, how many of you know what a death knell sounds like? I said, the last scream an animal gives before it takes its last breath. And everybody, some would raise their hand. I said, we've got hunters out there. You know what that sounds like? I said, now, how many of you know what a death knell is for a lodge? And they looked at me. I said, it's really similar. It's when they scream. We've never done it that way before.
That's very, very true. I like that a lot. And I've been hearing we never done that before a lot, because I've got a lot of crazy ideas, which has got me in some hot water at times. So I appreciate I'm going to use that. I might be taking that. We got some hunters in Ontario as well. And I do have to say, it's funny. I was actually looking back at my history of podcasts, Kentucky, or the Square Compass. I've been really lucky with the Brothers of Kentucky. I had I've had William O'Ware, Lodge of Research on. I've had Masonic Homes. One of my favorite Masonic memories ever was I attended the barn raising in Paducah, Kentucky.
It's coming up again on October the 1st.
And I absolutely loved it. I say one of my favorite Masonic memories probably ever would be, because I didn't grow up in a barn. I'm a city boy, but hearing the rain hitting the roof of the barn as the third degree was happening.
Yeah.
It was so Kentucky is an absolutely amazing state with some amazing brothers. Where do you see what in your opinion are the strengths, the positives of Freemasonry in Kentucky going forward? And what do you think are a couple of challenges that you're going to be facing?
Well, of all the things, I know it sounds kind of odd, but I think what has pulled Kentucky Freemasons together even stronger is how we reacted to the disasters we've had this year. The tornadoes that came through Kentucky on December the 10th, and then the floods we had on July 13th. And Masons pulled together. They showed their communities how much they cared. They pulled together just as a whole. And their response was phenomenal. We're still helping people on both ends of the state because of these disasters. And there's such a passion and compassion that we have. And it's extended from how we fellowship with each other in our lodges. You know, in Kentucky, I always tell everybody, I say, guys, you're not just Masons, you're Kentucky Masons. And Kentucky Masons aren't afraid to say, I love you. Kentucky Masons aren't afraid to take that extra step. You know, they're not afraid to go outside of their comfort zone to improve their communities. And so they're phenomenal folks. They really are.
And I concur completely. You know, the when I was in Paducah, I took the Greyhound bus in, and was there with Worshipful Brother. Well, Worshipful Brother Don Kelsey picked me up from the Paducah bus stop, which is like a shack basically with nobody in it. But my bus was leaving at 3 o'clock in the morning, and so I told Brother Kelsey, I was like, "Don't worry about it. I'll just take a taxi there. It's fine. Don't wake up at 3 in the morning." So I get up from my hotel and I go out to the lobby, and there he is waiting for me at like 2 to give me a ride. So then he gives me a ride, and we're waiting for the bus. And he had another brother with him who was older and had to get back home. So I said, just go back home. It's fine. The good people of Paducah, Kentucky will treat me fine. So we left. But then as I'm getting on the bus, he had actually, and this is now 3:10 in the morning, he actually drove back to the bus stop just to make sure I got on the bus safely and okay.
Yeah.
So good, friendly people in Kentucky. That's
Absolutely. They've got a heart of gold. And like I said, their response this year, of course, as I mentioned earlier, on July 13th, Eastern Kentucky got hit with some massive flooding, and we still have some communities over there that are suffering. We've had over 100 people missing. A lot of people lost their homes. And as soon as it happened, I'm getting calls from Masons in Kentucky. Hey, we're loading up a truckload of supplies. They'll travel from the western side to the eastern side to help with flooding, and then the eastern side Masons will load up what they can and travel to the western side to help with tornado victims. And it's just a mindset. I think we take our obligations and our oaths very seriously, and so I'm really proud of our Kentucky Masons.
You have to forgive my poor geography when it comes to the states. Is Kentucky at all close to Mississippi? Because I was wondering if there's anything happening right now in terms of help for brethren in Jackson, Mississippi. I know they're having troubles with their water systems, but I haven't heard anything.
Actually, the far western edge of Kentucky touches Illinois and crosses over into the Mississippi area, across the river in Tennessee and so forth. And so I'm sure that I haven't heard anything at this point in time. Usually, once they've declared a state of emergency, we kind of get wind of what their needs are, and then we've got Masons that will load up and go. It's amazing.
Anybody listening to this hears anything, leave a comment down below. Let us know what's going on with them, because I would love to know if there's any way that we can assist. I can put the word out in my lodges, Canadians. We do love to help out our American brothers. So we talked about the bright spots of Kentucky Freemasonry, which there are many, but certainly the brothers and their caring attitude has to be near the top. What are some of the challenges that you see moving forward?
I think the challenges Kentucky Masonry has is similar to the challenges every jurisdiction has. Naturally, membership starts dropping, and we're kind of limited. We don't recruit, as you well know, and so trying to keep that interest generated, trying to be relevant in our communities, and we've got, unfortunately, because of COVID and attrition, we've lost Masons due to old age. We've lost Masons due to illness and stuff. And so we've got the same growing pains that every other jurisdiction has. But I think to alleviate that, and this is something that I've talked about for years, it's not just making our meetings meaningful, but making masonry relevant again. The general community doesn't know who we are and what we stand for. This year, I launched the Not Just a Man of Mason campaign across Kentucky, to where we posted the Not Just a Man of Mason videos on social media to generate interest. Within the first week, I think we had thousands, clicking on and wanting to know about Freemasonry. If you're not familiar with that campaign, it's through the northern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite. They developed and produced some videos called Not Just a Man of Mason. And they give them to the Blue Lodges free of charge. It's primarily for Blue Lodge use. And it doesn't ask for recruiting. It doesn't ask for membership. It just says, this is who we are and this is why we are. And they're great videos. And so we've been doing that. And I think if we can become more relevant in our communities, one of the speeches I gave, among all the hundreds of speeches I've given this year, I talk about how we're missing the mark by staying not so much inclusive as far as Masons and not recruiting, but I think we're missing the mark by not letting our communities know how relevant we are. I mean, just look back at the history of Masonry and about how we influenced the turning around of our country to freedom of our country from as far back as the Revolutionary War. When you talk about the connections that Masons had in the 1700s, from Benjamin Franklin to the Marquis de Lafayette to George Washington, Paul Revere, and how it extended into our industrial leaders, King Gillette, J.C. Penney's, all these, Dave Thomas, Harlan Sanders, all these industrialists and leaders, that where Freemasonry wasn't just an idea. It was an idea about influence. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more, I think.
And I think what we've done is we've pulled back our element of influence for the sake of simply keeping or going through the motions of keeping our lodges open.
I couldn't agree more. We need to be influential. We need to be relevant to people. I think instead of chasing members, we need to chase relevancy. If we chase relevancy, the members will come.
Yes.
Right? If we are relevant to the world, if we're relevant to our communities, I always say the mission of this podcast is to promote or explore the ways Freemasonry is relevant to the communities in which it's located.
Well, this year, like I said, I mentioned this phrase that I've used this year to promote Freemasonry, and it's called character, conduct, and commitment. It's simple. It's a simple way to remember. It's 3 C's. And what I've been communicating to my craft is character is who we are when no one else is watching us. Because in reality, our Creator is always watching us. Conduct is how we act because our communities are watching us. They want to know who we are and what sets us apart from the rest of the world. Why are we so special? Well, it's by the way we conduct ourselves. And then commitment's what we give because our families are watching us. Our candidates are watching us. They deserve the very best, specifically our families. We're challenged every day as Masons to be better than we were yesterday. Tomorrow, we're going to be challenged to be better than we are today. And through that commitment, it makes us strive to be that better husband, that better son, that better father, that better brother, and that better member of our community. And then our candidates. And I've gotten on a soapbox over this. When you've got someone choosing to be a part of your fraternity, that should be the ultimate compliment. That they've looked at you on how you've conducted yourself and characterized yourself and your commitment. And they've said, I want to be like you. I want to have what you have. I want to feel the importance that you feel. I want that experience that you're experiencing. And so when they come into our lodges, we owe them every opportunity to experience Freemasonry the way we have. And the only way we can do that is we don't shortcut their ritual work. We don't treat them like they're not important. And if you shortcut their ritual work, you're sending a resounding message to them that they're not worth your time. And how are they going to react to that? They're not going to come back. And you treat them like they're the most important part of that fraternity, because they are the future. That is your legacy that you're leaving when you impart your experience on them. That's how Freemasonry is not just going to survive, it's going to thrive.
And I think that that's the goal, right? We want Freemasonry to survive, but more than that, we don't want it to just survive, right? We want it to thrive.
Absolutely.
And the work that you're doing in Kentucky, I can tell you just based on what I've seen, talking with and visiting with the Brethren of Kentucky, it's absolutely wonderful to see. So thank you so much for taking the time to be on this podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor. I
really hope to see you in Bowling Green. If not there, then I really hope to be back in the state of Kentucky soon. I'll bring some, you guys are great down there, but the one thing you don't have is Hiram Walker whiskey. So I'll bring you that. We can drink that instead of that water you call Kentucky bourbon.
Well, what we do have is a new bourbon, Horse Soldiers bourbon. Have you seen the movie 12 Strong with Chris Hemsworth?
I haven't.
It's about these 12 soldiers from Afghanistan. Well, it's based on a true story. Well, the 12 soldiers are opening a distillery roughly a quarter mile from my house. And so you come to Bowling Green, and I'll make sure you get an opportunity to sample some of it.
Much appreciated. All right, most worshipful sir, thank you so much.
All right, take care. All right, bye-bye.